What it is, what it was, and what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video is called Spirit War Boot Camp number 115, and this is called infoplastic data hologram, which is a thing, believe it or not. So let's break it down. What is info? Info is information or data, right? So it's some useful description. It's like a code. It's encoded information. Let's put it that way. Encoded information. So that's the info. What is plastic? Well, most people don't know, but plastic relates to the word plasma. So like the basic fluidic constituents of our blood is called plasma. The basic fluidic info constituents of space is also called plasma, right? And so the word plastic refers to something that can be molded and shaped often. Sometimes you hear the phrase the plastic arts, which would be like sculpture would be the most obvious one. But really everything where you're manipulating a physical object, that's plastic. So infoplastic, now combine those, what does that mean? Well, I would give just a real simple example. A lot of people have heard of these Sumerian cylinder seals, the cuneiform tablets. So in that instance, you have like a clay-like substance, right? It's heated. So first it's imprinted. So in this case, this would be thermoplastic. So you use something being in a kind of fluidified state in a temporary way, like when you're forging a sword, right? Like you get it really hot so you can hammer it and shape it into different really precise configurations. So that's an example of thermoplastic, but we also have infoplastic. So what does that mean? It's the use of information, right, encryption, to shape a physical object. So like for instance, if you're to take a printing press and print a book, that's infoplastic, because you're taking and using the physical materium, right, as the basis to store information, right? So now let's talk about data hologram. In a way, that's kind of redundant, but it's just re-emphasizing the fact that this is a information storage, right? So a data hologram is specifically a hologram that's composed of information. So now the hologram part, what does that mean? Well, that gets into the mathematical concept of self-similarity, nesting, that's another way to refer to it, fractalized, right? So it's a self-similar repeating pattern that repeats on every scale from top to bottom. Transforms. In mathematics we talk about transforms. So that's where you take a formula and then you modify it in a certain way continually, right? So all these are related concepts. So like for instance, most people know about DNA, right? So DNA is infoplastic, right? Because it stores data and information of our so-called genetic code, right? And plastic because it moves, right? It moves and changes, and it makes copies of itself, for one thing. So, but what allows, so this is where you have like metastructure. So there's a code that tells it how to move and evolve. So a lot of times we think of codes as being static, but in this case we have a dynamic living code system that's infoplastic, right? So by manipulating the physicality of the form of this like DNA crystal lattice, right, you're storing information and you're allowing the transmission of information, right? A lot of people emphasize the fact that DNA and RNA are optically active crystals, which I do think is very important. And there's a lot of photonics involved when you have cell replication, right? They emit ultraviolet light in particular. Maybe that's why the purple gang and the purple sex cult uses purple, because it's related to reproduction. So anyway, so infoplastic is where you shape the world around you by information storage and information transfer. So data hologram implies that the large scale codes and the micro scale codes are all encrypted at every level. So every little piece of the hologram contains a full image. It contains the complete data set, right? So now, how does this pertain to our overall spirit war thesis? Well, in essence, it gets right to the core of it, because the basic thesis of the spirit war is that reality is infoplastic in nature more than it is the normal way that we think of material reality. So some simple type of corollaries of that is the idea that our beliefs determine our reality. They guide our actions and our strategies and the way that we perceive and conceptualize our environmental conditions. And based on those assumptions or those calculations or whatever you want to call it, We behave, and then that behavior creates a feedback loop where we create future conditions for us. We shape our future preconditions, right, by the actions that we take, and those actions in turn are based on an informational construct and an internal map of reality that we have. So you have this thermoplastic feedback loop in essence. So why is this important? Well, let's contextualize it in the terms of our previous video. Like the immediate prior video was called etheric polarization, and the thesis of that video was that there's an energetic domain that shapes our physical reality. So part of that energetic and information domain would be like sound and light. Those are both vibrational fields that propagate, and they're both profoundly intertwined with the creation, sustenance, and destruction of all the material things around us, including our DNA, which I was just mentioning. As I said, it's optically active. So this is the way in which we're at co-generation with our environment, right? Like we're participating in a reciprocal creation process, right? We're shaped by the process, but we also shape the process. So you're getting this like cybernetic loop of self-correction potentially, if you see your reality for what it is, right? And you don't get caught in dogmatic, never-ending thought loops, right, of unproductive mental patterns. If you don't do that, then now you start to conceptualize this input-output, the cybernetic, infoplastic nature of reality. So coming back again to the concept of a data hologram, so that's where we get this idea. Holographic nature is that the internal and external are of the same substance and they exchange energy. So there's no hard, fast line, right, between ourself and the external world. In reality, we're taught the opposite because we're in a delusional materialist worldview, which is the basis of more or less economic and spiritual fascism, right? Monotheism and economic fascism are two parts of the same coin, right? It's like if you believe in a monotheistic cosmology, which is that there's one being that creates, controls, and destroys all reality, that's a form of fascism and over-centralization. And every society that's ever had monotheism generally wages race-based warfare, okay, first of all, because they can't tolerate multiplicity in any context, because they're asserting supreme absolute authority for something that not only is not merit-based, but for a thing that doesn't actually exist in reality whatsoever, right? So, but the fact that such an absurd system can persist to the extent that it has in our reality and our history is proof of thermoplastic nature of the data hologram in which we exist, right? So data holograms have to replicate in order to sustain. And so, because humans are I describe the human organism as a colony or a hive organism because we're made of so many different types of tissues, and we do have a microbiome of our own, right? So, and without which we couldn't function normally. So there's this interdependence at every level, but yet we're raised in a dualistic dialectical materialism, through our cultural conditioning. So we have a fundamentally inaccurate model of reality on purpose, right? The behest of something extraneous to ourselves. We've been implanted with this delusional materialism and dialectical materialism that posits this like discrete, like independent existence of something. But what is there in the existence that is not temporary and which is not reliant upon environmental conditions to maintain its integrity? There's nothing that exists in such a way that we can really perceive. So what does that mean in our life context? Well, all that has to happen to forge your reality is that there has to be a somewhat broad consensus, right? Because this feedback loop, like I'm saying, the infoplastic nature of our reality, it's kind of like if everyone repeats a lie, in a way that lie becomes the truth. To the extent like, grandparents will tell their grandkids some story that might have never happened, but which they were told by their grandparents. You know what I mean? And each version along the way, there's open to corruption of the translation matrix, right? So You know, you see how shaky the foundations of our cultural and ideological reality really is. It's based on hearsay. Like, this would not be considered evidentiary in a court of law. You can't really present what we have as the evidence of our senses as proof or substantiation of any kind of reality, right? And people are very unwilling to accept that reality. You know, we want to be in a fairy tale, and this further enhances the thermoplastic nature of our reality. Because if we hear a story we like, or a story that gives us rationale for our existence, even if it's an unpleasant one, often many times people will cling to it, because being at cause over our thermoplastic reality, so in other words, for taking responsibility for it, right? It's much more difficult. A lot of people don't like that because of the inherent uncertainty involved. We have a certainty bias, right? We have a stabilization bias, which is, what is it stabilizing? Well, the only thing that it's attempting to stabilize is our faulty self-concept. That's what it's based on, and that's what it's there to sustain, right? So you can see all the problems involved in that, and that's why human life can be so frustrating for so many of us, if not all of us. But anyway, the point is, how do we take this information and use it to improve our lives? Well, like I said, there's a dynamic to this reality creation process, and the best way to learn about it is to learn about ourselves. How do our perceptions work? To what capacity can we exert cause over our environment? What can we create, if you will? How can we shape the reality around us? And there's deep science to that, and a lot of people come at it from different angles. Like, you could look at it from the point of view of like the perceptual realities and positive reactions that we get from those around us, right? Like, we could look at that as our metric, right? We could look at monetary success. We could look at physical strength. We could look at, there's so many different criteria that you could adopt to feed into your cybernetic loop, right? Like, what's the autocorrect at work here? Like, how do you judge the success of your actions, and how do you judge their improvement potential, right? Subjective, like, that's what I'm pointing out. It is subjective, and it's never going to be 100% satisfactory. But the more we understand about the process, this feedback loop that we get into with our senses, our cogitation, and our actions, right? Like, how can we optimize that process? And there's a lot that can be learned that can help with that. I mean, look at all the things that humans have achieved, all the greatest architects, poets, musicians, you know, leaders, what have you. Anyone that exerts a discernible influence in their world, like, they can create amazing things. It's like, you could be shocked every day when you just look at the things that humans can do and create. And so the proof that this process can be harnessed and utilized in a constructive way, potentially, right? But the issue becomes with this very thermoplastic nature of it that creates this potential for freedom and different variety of life experiences. That same exact function can also be hijacked by anyone. Like, let's put it this way, if an evil person understands the dynamics of this process, and they internally have accepted the reality of this creation process, that determines their skill at it, right? So they could be purely evil and completely master this process. And if they do so, then they become at cause for others' reality. So they print, just like a printing press or something will make and print this ink on a piece of paper or what have you, or carve it onto a stone, right? Our very physical being is shaped by these, you know, thermoplasmic data holograms that compose our reality around us. They imprint us physically. Like, oftentimes people, if we hear a certain description of ourselves from people often enough, like, we could come to believe it. And so, but by the same token, that same property that allows us to be programmed with external negativity, we can also program ourselves. We could decide how we want to participate in reality and be persistent and learn the mechanisms of infoplastic data holograms and how to create them. You know, there's a lot that can be learned. There's a lot of skill that can be demonstrated on that domain of conduct. And I mean, just look at the internet. Perfect example. Like, somebody who's very low IQ and very questionable moral integrity, right? They could propagate hella. They could spread really virulently. They could go viral in every sense, right? Like their genetic code can imprint and propagate external code, right? Value neutral. Like whether it's good or helpful or not, like that has no bearing on the power of the propagation of this data hologram. So one thing I want to get into was self-similarity, because this is going to help us be more skilled at the infoplastic data hologram construction, right? So we learn about it. What we learn that there's certain properties that make a good code, if you will, that makes an information packet like a data hologram. It makes it highly storable and highly transferable, right? So, the hermetic maxim of as above, so below, as within, so without really applies. Because if you look at nature all around us in all its variety of forms, there's certain constants. Like these, often it's math related, right? There's certain factors that are highly adaptable. There's certain factors that are conducive to a stable growth process, right? This like logarithmic geometric spiral of expansion, right? It's just functional. That's why so many buildings are built the same way, and why different architectural styles will propagate. It's because there's certain simple functional patterns that are highly stable, and they can be. And and there's other patterns that are more dynamic in nature, like they're evolving and changing in a constant way. And so the only way to be effective at that, in my opinion, is for us to mimic this universal code that we see around us. And so to the greater extent that we truly accept the infoplastic nature of our reality, right? And we learn to be observant, right? Like we learn to be high efficiency data processors of what we see around us. So we can notice it, we can pick up on it, we can expand upon it, or we can, optimize for that input, because everything's more or less an energetic and informational input that we see around us. And so what they say, making lemonade, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Well, that's what reality is like. You're always being given, there's always an abundance of productivity in our environment of various types, and each type has a unique suitability and usefulness, right? And so if we try to fight that, we're always at odds with that, or we're always trying to want things to be some way other than what they actually are, then the potential for optimization of those dynamic inputs is reduced. So that's why you can see a lot of people are poisoned. Their thermoplastic and infoplastic propensities are poisoned and crippled by imprintation with a false reality concept, right? So a very materialistic worldview, for instance, or a worldview of extreme like segregation into like, walled off units, right? Like it creates a kind of parasitic type of paradigm, and a lot of people accept that. They internalize that, and they guide their life and their decision making based on that kind of a paradigm. And to the extent that it's inaccurate, that inaccuracy is going to extrapolate into greater and greater degrees of chaos and greater unsatisfactory results. But because humans are infoplastic, right? They're oftentimes their opinions, their data storage, and their worldview is more powerful than 100% evidence 24/7. Like they could resist all input. They could basically choose to anti-optimize to conditions and to deny what's all around them. And the weird thing about infoplastic reality is that people can create this like bubble of a fake reality around themselves, but it's like a hollow, lifeless, drab thing, because it's not in a state of cybernetic exchange. Like it's not intaking novelty and new information, and it's not effectively producing novelty, right? It's not creating an adaptive interplay with its environment. So it's lifeless, and becomes in a state of stasis. Like ideological dogmatism is a state of total stasis. You can never evolve, and you can't intake any new information, because almost all information in existence is going to defy your dogma, right? So are you just willing to reject it all in order to sustain dogma? I would say probably 70% of everyone I've ever met in my life is dogma domain. They're like And it's, you can have an atheistic dogma, you can have a scientific rational dogma, you could have what they call the Pollyanna dogma, rose-colored glasses dogma, normalcy bias of all types, right? So what is the adaptive, like constructive use of this knowledge of infoplastic data harmonics, right? Well, you could learn any skill. Like if you, a musician is, this is what exactly what they're doing. Like if you know, that's what tuning an instrument is. You're engaging in this exact process because you want your data interface, the piano or the guitar or whatever it is, you want it to be uniformly integrated. You want it to have a coherent internal system of harmonic equilibration or harmonic sort of parameters, you know. You want it to be optimized for a certain parametric frequency band, right? So that it can give it can receive an exchange frequency at that uniform domain, right? It's in tune, and so you could play with everyone else's instruments at that level. So you can harmonize with them, and you can effectively engage in a type of data exchange, if you will, you know. And so that's one example. It's demonstrating what I'm saying. What is musical frequency? It's a thermoplastic and infoplastic data exchange, right? So like that's what resonance is. Like if you have a trumpet that hits a really strong note that's in the range of a guitar, that guitar will start to resonate without even being touched, right? It receives that vibration and it oscillates in harmony with or it oscillates in unison with that vibration, right? And so this is one perfect example. Or painting again. If you want to paint a painting that's really beautiful, you have to either harmonize with the true environment. So when someone sees that, they're like, wow, that's, you know, they know exactly what it is. Like they could recognize a famous person's portrait, or they could recognize a plant or a landscape, you know what I mean? But then there's a whole nother domain where really you're creating something purely psychedelic or purely fantastical, but yet it's compelling to people, even though they've never experienced a reality like that. It's exotic and compelling, right? It's not grotesque or off-putting, right? So it captures their mind, and by participating in it and perceiving it, they're creating an internal map of your creation. So again, you have this infoplastic exchange between the painter and the perceiver, right? Everything, it all applies to the same, you know. Even, okay, let's say you're a businessman and you run a liquor store, same thing. You have to be able to give and exchange the currency of people around you. If you're here where I live, you got to be able to do Paymex or whatever it is. You got to be able to send money to Mexico or send what do you call it, Western Union and stuff. You have to be able to do currency transfers, right? That's a huge thing, you know. And just for people to even be able to buy your stuff, or you got to have like a data card processor for all the banking cards and credit cards, right? Or you got to have Bitcoin. I've actually seen Bitcoin ATMs at some of them now. So the point is, all these things amount to what I'm saying. It's a connection between the sender and the receiver, so that information can pass back and forth in a seamless way. Energy and information can be transferred back and forth. All commerce is based on that. So again, it's just another example, but you could apply this to any field of our own endeavor. It amounts to the same thing. Infoplastic data holograms. If you build really accurate ones, you can have a very successful life. And actually, if people pick up on what you've created and it's highly efficient and effective, and it fills a niche of something of necessity, right? Other people will copy it, and your mimetic, you know, info holograms will propagate and spread. And that's how culture is created. So, but also, the opposite is also true. You could have a super dysfunctional ideation and a dysfunctional data hologram set, right? And so you gradually would like distance yourself from everybody because they don't share your information frequency exchange, right? So you become isolated, or you become you know, just more or less disconnected. So these are the two ways that this thing can go. And of course, the relevance of this to the spirit world is like most of what I've been talking about is this pernicious external types of programming, how people are programmed, what the effects of the programming are, what all the different programming agendas that are going on, you know, mass media, politics, so-called science, all these different things. It's a It's really a form of narrative control, and it's a creation of infoplastic data holograms. They want people to believe a certain thing, so they try to imprint them with that. They want to get them to think that doing vapes is good, or like online sports gambling. Like, you're trying to get people into these data loops of various types. You want to get addicted to GLP medications so they could turn themselves into a gecko with the gecko toxin. You know what I mean? It's crazy. But all these things, like I'm saying, it's just data holograms. It's a narrative, and it's a story, and it's a presentation that someone's giving you. And if you imprint with it, it turns into this data loop, which could be money harvesting. It could be like data harvesting off you, data mining you. It could be harvesting your attention, all these different things. But in a way, it all amounts to the same thing, is that you're being thermoplastically and infoplastically imprinted, which changes you down to the core level. It rewrites your code to varying degrees. Like, sometimes it can be super minor, but it's never nothing. It's never zero. And so then the question becomes, how do you get out of the pathological manifestation of that and become at cause for that? You become the source on that level, right? It involves mastery of all the concepts that I've been trying to describe here. The recognition of information and data science as a practice, like how to engage in it. What's your objective? Like, how do you improve and optimize all your functionality on that domain, instead of just thinking about money or like social status or whatever, libido kind of bullshit, or consumerism is what most people are in, right? Or just escapism, right? Those are all choices. They're all options. But in my opinion, it's really dumbs down the reality. And largely it's due to the fact that people have no concept of the things that I'm trying to describe, which is exerting sovereignty on the information domain, so that you become a master creator of an infoplastic data hologram of your own reality. You could create yourself as whatever the peak greatness of your own conception is. Like, you can reach it incrementally, time after time. And the better you get at it, the better, faster results, and the greater your horizon of possibility can be expanding. And so maybe if people watch multiple videos, like, take each video in the context of what I'm describing here and see how it's trying to give a greater degree of situational awareness on the domain of information imprintation, how that creates culture, how it creates our politics, how it creates our economics, and really shapes the status of every single individual. Sometimes they're ignorant of it, sometimes they're aware of it. And so this has been Spirit War Boot Camp number 115. See you soon.